Welcome to the Geek 101 podcast, Road to Arrowverse Crisis, Episode 11. Supergirl Season 4, Legends of Tomorrow, Season 4. I'm your host, Andy Bowman, and with me as always, our good friends, Tessa and Sam. How you guys doing?
Really excited to do this episode of podcast. These are two of my favorite seasons of both these shows.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of negative things to say today.
For once. It'll be different next time.
Yeah.
but this is some peak Supergirl, peak Legends.
All right, well, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Supergirl Season 4. What did you guys think about Supergirl Season 4 as a whole?
Well, considering the fact that we are SJWs, we loved it.
Well, I will say, I was behind. We were both behind when we watched this season of Supergirl, and so we got to do the thing where we binged all of it, basically. And I went into it not knowing a lot. I knew some things about the season, but I didn't know a lot about the season. I had successfully avoided most spoilers. But I was not expecting Supergirl to be this subversive. Like, they had dealt with some of these themes about, you know, aliens on Earth being sort of stand-ins for, you know, immigrants into the United States. And, you know, they dealt with some of these issues before. And they dealt with some issues of diversity, which, you know, is something that's near and dear to the creators of these shows' hearts. But this was a hard-hitting season. Like, this was a season of television that really seemed like it had its finger on the pulse of what was going on, what's still going on in this country. Is that how you all felt about it?
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, I like that, but also they basically, by kicking out, by outing Marston as an alien and replacing her with Baker, who is a Trump stand-in, they literally have the president being a puppet of Kasnia, basically mirroring the theory that Trump is a puppet of Russia. The only difference here is that everyone's a puppet of Lex. That's the way it fits into the Superman Supergirl story, but they pretty much just go, here's what's happening in real life, here we go.
Yeah, and it almost made it like, sometimes I don't want to watch television like that too closely tries to do political things, because it just makes me very depressed. For an example, I have yet to see an episode of The Handmaid's Tale because I've never come home thinking, you know what I want to feel like tonight? Really terrible. And so this season did a really good job, I think, of balancing that, of feeling like I still did feel sometimes like, oh, this is what's happening right now, and it's very depressing. But it also balanced it, I think, really well with the Supergirl mythos and this, like, sort of optimism at the same time that comes with the Supergirl tone of the show.
Yeah, I agree fully. They're able to make points and do something really, really interesting very early on that I think a lot of shows that try to be political aren't able to pull off properly. But let's just go ahead and dive right into a few of the new characters this season, because
there's a lot, actually.
Yeah, and interesting choice here is Nia Nal / Dreamer, played by Nicole Maines, which this is a bold choice to actually do this. Tessa, do you want to break down why it's a great hit for diversity?
So Nia Nal, and I haven't read the comics with Dreamer in them. This is a character from the comics, correct? I'm not wrong about that. And the character from the comics is a trans woman. Is that also correct?
I actually do not know.
I believe so. We could look that up. But this is a character who is a trans woman, and more importantly, this character is played by a trans actor, which there's been a lot of argument recently, especially with some of the most recent exploits of Scarlett Johansson, about diversity and if gay or trans characters should be played by gay or trans people, or if they have to be exclusively played by them. So there's a lot of issues of representation here. of, the type of people who are excluded and the way that these stories are told. And so it's not only a bold choice, I guess for some people it's a bold choice, for some people it's the right choice, to have this character be played by a trans actor. It lends itself to not only, I think, the authenticity of the character, but I think it also, it's very inclusive. It's not just saying, like, we're going to tell these stories, but we're actually going to let these people in to tell their own stories. And so I know it was very controversial at the time when this character was introduced, but I think Nicole Maines is great. I think her introduction is one of the best parts of this season. She's introduced as another reporter at Catco, so she's sort of Kara's protege in the same way that Kara was Kat's protege, and we get to see a lot of that sort of action going on. But then we also get to see sort of some intersectionality as well, because she's revealed to not only be trans, but she's also an alien, or she's half alien, half human. And so she has some stakes in the conversation that is happening during this season as well. So we get some intersectionality, we get some great acting. Nicole Maines is adorable, just like Melissa Benoist is adorable. And so, I think that there's a lot to say here. There's also a lot to say about the fact that there's a lot more female characters on this show than there are male characters, which I think, at this point, there are more, which I think works really well on this show, too.
Okay. So, I just went ahead and looked it up because I'm sure a few of the people are screaming. Okay. Nia Nal is actually brand new. She's based on a character named Nura Nal, who's Dreamer or Dream Girl. And Nura Nal is not transgender, but, Nia Nal, they specifically created a transgender character for the purpose of being diverse, it appears.
Okay, well,
or for having trans representation, which
it looks like
is awesome.
Yeah, so on my separate research adventure during that, I see that back in 1992, they introduced a scientist who took a drug to change her sex from male to female. So that was the DC Comics 1 gesture at something approaching trans back in the 90s.
And I think her storyline works pretty well, because one of the things that happens this is an origin story, right, for Nia Nal this season. We get hints that she's going to become Dreamer because she's constantly falling asleep at her desk. And she tells Kara and James that she has narcolepsy, which they become increasingly very, nosy about. It actually made me really uncomfortable how involved they tried to become in her medical care for this condition. I was like, okay, you guys are actually her employers. You don't get to ask her these questions at work. But it turns out that actually what's happening is she reveals her alien heritage. Her mother came to Earth because she has a superpower where she dreams the future. And this is something that's passed down through the women in her line. And so Nia starts to exhibit this power. She's able to dream the future. And there's a couple of really interesting scenes where she dreams these really disturbing futures, right, about the main storyline, which we'll talk about here presently, I'm sure. What was interesting to me was, I'm trying to remember the name of the episode, but there's an episode where Kara and Nia go to Nia's hometown, and they go to her hometown, and it's revealed that everyone thought that her sister was going to get this power because it's passed matrilineally, and when it's revealed that Nia has the power, her sister does not react well. And I think that this is a really interesting episode because it sort of takes aim at second wave feminism, which I think this season actually does in some other ways as well. But it takes aim at this idea that, there is a strain of feminism that says we are very supportive of people affirming their gender identity, but we're not supportive when you actually start to encroach on our turf, right? There's a lot of biological essentialism in the way that Nia's sister reacts to her. She says, you're not even a real girl, and, all of these things. And so it's interesting because it does... The trans identity here is not just played for diversity. It's actually part of the main story. It's actually part of sort of the political issues that are at stake in this season. And I think it works well for the character.
That episode is Blood Memory, by the way.
Blood Memory, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
The bit about her knowing that her daughter will have a power and then it turning... Like, I really... like that. The only thing I really don't like about Nicole Maines as an actress is she was born in 1987, so I feel really old.
It's okay, you'll get over it. You get used to it. Pretty soon people will be making jokes about the fact that movies were released, back when you were alive, like you guys did to me last week. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
All full circle eventually.
But yeah, I mean, if nothing else, Nia Knoll, great addition to the...
Yes, and I feel like, and cis white dude here, I think they did it well. I would love to hear from fans and listeners who have different life experiences, as to confirm that they did this well or what they could have done better. I would love to be able to talk about that and figure it out. And just hear.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is acknowledged in this season, where she says, this is my story, but everybody's is different. Which, I mean, that's always the problem with this type of representation, is that when you only have one trans character on a show, or on of the majority of these shows on the CW, they sort of have the burden of representing all trans people, which is problematic, as we all know. So I think that they do a fairly good job, but it would be really interesting to hear, I would be interested to hear people's opinion on this character.
Next up, I think the other most interesting new character because of the background is Ben Lockwood.
Yes.
Who's mostly the villain for this season. What did you guys think about Ben Lockwood?
You mean... All I can think about is the fact that he's a prep school teacher in Riverdale now.
I mean, he is the grassroots fascist, right? Isn't that kind of...
I thought he was more of a Ben Shapiro, who's quasi-fascist, but the oh god, that's a terrible way to put it. Ben Shapiro's a piece of shit, but somebody who is well educated, who is an academic, and in the third episode, Man of Steel, which I loved so much, they really show how it's easy to slip down this like path of hatred and really become something that you don't recognize.
It reminded me of, I don't know if you remember, I feel like anything from like the first decade of South Park is a deep cut at this point, just because it's been going on for so long. But there was an episode of South Park fairly early on where Randy Marsh and a bunch of other people start losing their jobs, and it's the whole immigration issue, and then the whole thing they say in the whole episode is they took our jobs, and it's played for laughs obviously on South Park, and it is not played for laughs, but it's just proof that this whole like they took our jobs thing has been going on for so long, except this time we can actually say aliens because they are literally aliens. And that's really the only difference here. It's an issue of isolationism and not wanting to accommodate anybody who doesn't look like you or does something you don't like to do. And
there's like a personal history too. So like in the episode Man of Steel, which is a standout episode I think of this season, and again this episode made me very depressed because it seems so prescient in a lot of ways to describe, because when we think of fascists, the first image that pops in our head are the Nazis from Earth X, right? Like these cartoonish villains who, are very straightforwardly evil. And what this episode does is sort of complicate that idea, but not in a way that I think praises Ben Lockwood or holds him up as a sort of like, oh, well, evil men are just complicated, right? But it does tell us that, like, this doesn't happen. People aren't born thinking these things, right? It's a combination of events that cause them to think this way, plus indoctrination or propaganda causes them to feel this way as well. I do think it's interesting that he is academic, like you said, Andy, because neoliberalism tells us that the more educated you become, the less ignorant you are, the more open-minded you are, the more tolerant you are. And that's simply not true. I mean, I think that's something we've learned over the past 3 years is that, like, educated people, and he's a history professor, so you would think that he would, have a grasp on how American history has been, full of instances of xenophobia and hatred towards people who are other, but he doesn't. He completely is not able to grasp that in his version of history.
Yeah, and the other thing that the show does pretty well too, and this kind of happens before. Man of Steel is a really great episode, but before and after that, what they do is they say, well, so obviously we're setting ourselves up and you, the viewer, as somebody who should disagree with, Lockwood and all that he believes and does, and the people who follow him. But in the very first episode of the season, we have John's support group buddy, Fiona, being kidnapped and maybe dead, maybe not. Eventually she's not, but then she is. And that's the exegesis of introducing Manchester Black, who, I guess we can talk more about his character in a minute, but basically it's a way of introducing the other, quote unquote, the other side, the side that's opposed to the radical opposition to Lockwood's radical, kind of more fascist thing. And the show does a really good job of saying, okay, yeah, we shouldn't be on the side of the fascists who end up being tools of the Lex Luthor Kasnia thing. But that doesn't mean we should go the other direction in an extreme either, because that's also bad.
Well, I thought it was interesting too how at the beginning of the season, Kara is kind of set up to be like the white Trump voter. Did you guys notice that in the first episode? Because Jean, she runs into these there are these two characters that are introduced in the first episode, and they have like a several episode arc, Otis and Mercy Graves, who are former Lex Luthor henchmen, and they commit a hate crime basically against an alien. And Jean spends most of this episode trying to convince Kara that there is a anti-alien sentiment that's brewing in the country. And she keeps saying things like, no, everything's fine. Like, that's all over. Like, people all, we all live together. Like, Supergirl has never been targeted. Like, people love Supergirl. It's all fixed. And Jean actually at one point calls her out on her privilege by saying, yeah, but that's because you look human. And which is a very like that sounds almost exactly like the rhetoric of saying like, oh, but no, you're white, right? Like you present as a very like white, blonde-haired, girl, and so you're not subjected to the types of microaggressions or macroaggressions that perhaps someone who's other, is exposed to. And of course, by the end of the episode, she stumbles across the Agents of Liberty. Or the Children of Liberty, whatever. Ben Lockwood's the Agent of Liberty. Mm-hmm. The Children of Liberty. She stumbles across this like internet like dark web cesspool of like incels basically saying like, oh well, I'm gonna kill this alien, or like, tell me how to make a bomb, and like all this stuff. And she realizes that she's like the one who's wrong, that things haven't been fixed, which again, very depressing. If you remember a couple years ago when we all woke up, to this rude awakening that none of this had gone away, right? That it was all sort of, well, those of us who were privileged enough to not be able to see it had a rude awakening to realize that all this stuff was still, below the surface.
Yeah, and like one thing with the Manchester Black, I think the show leans a little too centrist, because they really, like, Manchester Black has a lot of really good reasons for acting the way he does, and I don't know. I'm always of the punch a Nazi mindset, and be anti-fascist. But history does tell us that peaceful movements succeed at a much more. They succeed much more than non-peaceful movements.
Well, and I think that's what causes. I think it's a course correction. I think that when we, as Tessa mentioned, we binged most of this season, and it's easy to miss when you binge things that when you're not watching them week to week, you don't have a lot of time to stop and think in some of the ways that the creators do. But I think by the time we get to, it's episode 13. So Ben is, Lockwood is imprisoned, and he gets out on a technicality because he was charged for crimes.
He was charged for terrorism, but you can't commit terrorism against aliens.
Right. So he's let out of prison in episode 12. And so episode 13, what's so funny about Truth, Justice, and the American Way is when Manchester breaks out with Hat, the best named character ever, and Menagerie, and they're the elite. And I think this is a course correction, because I think that, like you said, maybe we're the people writing the show were very careful to be centrist, and maybe they felt that too many viewers were like, yeah, Manchester Black is right. So they were like, you know what? Let's put him with a team of people, and let's make it clear that he's on the wrong side as well.
Yeah. Well, and also, I don't know, did we mention that Manchester Black was engaged to Fiona?
No, we did not mention that Manchester Black's big motivation is kind of because Fiona was fridged.
Right, and yes. So Fiona, who is also Evil Eleanor.
I was going to say, place, Evil Eleanor.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the backstory is that he convinced her to go to America in the first place because they were more accepting of aliens. Wasn't that right?
Yeah, so she was outed. So they're both British. I mean, Manchester Black, historically, British flag across his chest. But she was outed as an alien in England, and her life was in danger, and so he tells her to move to America because it's safer. But then, of course, she's kidnapped by Ben Lockwood, and she is tortured and used for her powers to do some form of terrorism. The first half of the season is really Ben Lockwood does terrorism. That's a lot of the plot of the first half of the season.
And the second part is Ben Lockwood's a puppet.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll get there. But so she is killed by Ben Lockwood. Even though, despite Jean and Manchester Black's best efforts, because Jean no longer runs the DEO, he's now he hasn't become a private investigator yet, but he's a man of peace. And so, which is another theme this season. And so he's trying to help Manchester find Fiona. They find her, but she dies. Like you said, Andy, it's very fridge appropriate here. Manchester, who we know has a dark past, although we don't really know exactly what all that is, immediately goes into revenge mode, and he wants to track down Agent Liberty and kill him. And so a lot of the first half of the season also revolves around those plans, and he's willing to do anything and sacrifice anyone to get that revenge, including Supergirl, who he almost kills. So it's... Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting first half of the season because you do get this sort of centrist view where Manchester is wrong and Agent Liberty is wrong. But I think that I mean, it does happen. Like, there were times where I was like, no, Manchester is right here. So it's really, really hard for me to. I think that's right. It's hard sometimes when you feel that Ben Lockwood is a despicable person to agree with anyone who says, oh, well, he has rights too.
Yeah, it's a really good first half of the season. And, I think that most of the peripheral storylines are pretty good. The whole John as a man of peace thing based on what his dad challenged him to be at the end of last season was kind of a snooze. But there were a couple of other good things. There's of course Lena trying to be good.
Yeah.
And then also Brainy's crush on Nia is really fun.
Brainy develops this crush on Nia, and it's very, very cute. Well, and Nia like crushes on him too, and so that there's like a will they, won't they that goes through the whole season. James
and beyond,
James as Guardian accidentally becomes like a poster child for the Children of Liberty.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, that was a really interesting storyline for me because, like, obviously James Olsen is very anti-fascist. I mean, as a character, he's anti-fascist. But it was interesting to me to see, like, because there's also sort of this critique of viral culture in this season, and it'll go on into the next season as well, but this idea that like he's seen defending humans against some evil aliens, and then the Children of Liberty like endorse him, like they're like, oh, he's a human standing up for humans. And so James finds himself in this very precarious position where he obviously doesn't endorse anything that the Children of Liberty are saying, but like he is being celebrated for some values that he does not agree with. And so I thought that was a really interesting storyline.
And then the other one is checking in on Alex, who is now head of the DEO, except she's immediately undermined by Colonel Haley, who is bound and determined to bend Supergirl to her will, which leads Supergirl to quit, which leads Colonel Haley to say, I'm going to interrogate people to find out who she is, and John wipes everyone at the DEO who knows who Supergirl is, wipes all of their memories, including Alex.
Yeah, who asks him to. So, like, they all agree to it. This isn't like he forces them all to forget Supergirl.
Well, he's a man of peace. He wouldn't have done it.
Right, but they all want to protect her identity, and so Alex is her knowledge. She still knows Kara, and that Kara is her sister. Like, she still has all those memories, but her knowledge that Kara is Supergirl is wiped, which leads to some really... The other theme I think that comes out of this season is isolation. Like, Kara as Supergirl becomes very isolated from the people around her because they either don't know who she is or they all suspect her of things, right? Like, there's a lot of suspicion about her being an alien from the Children of Liberty. There's a lot of gaslighting, I guess, of people around her. And so, it's interesting to see her become more and more isolated as the season goes on. Like, she doesn't feel like she has a lot of people she can turn to for help.
Right. And another kind of theme, especially at the end of the season, once Lex is finally out and about, is really, no matter what, everyone is the puppet of the wealthy.
Yes. Yeah, because Lex Luthor does not... I mean, he hates aliens, but he doesn't care about he doesn't care about the US. He doesn't care about Kasnia. Like, he cares about being powerful and being rich and being, having things his way, which is, again, a musical cue that comes up more than once. So it's interesting that we find out that all of this stuff, like Ben Lockwood is a puppet. He was manipulated by Lex Luthor.
He managed to become part of the president's cabinet, by the way.
Right, yeah, which was horrifying.
But he even put, what's his name, the new president, even put him in the position to become, like, he took out the vice presidential candidate and got him replaced on the ticket. Like, he was doing everything a long time before anybody else. even had an inkling that something was happening.
The way the show sort of sets up Lex, so Lex is obviously a Superman villain, the greatest Superman villain, but we knew that he was in prison.
Brainiac just reached out through Tessa's computer and did something mean to her. So.
I want to mention the thing with Brainy 5 that happens at the end of the season, but so Lex has been in prison the whole time that the show has been off camera, right?
He hasn't been in prison the whole time.
Well, yes, but for the purposes of us as viewers, he's been in prison. We thought he was in prison the whole time. But what's interesting about this is that it basically implies that as soon as Lex Luthor was imprisoned for the whole, is it the Red Sun debacle, he has been planning this since then, basically. He's been pulling strings, of course, and I think the other thing, too, is that rich people don't go to prison.
Yeah,
right?
He was able to just leave.
Like, he can just leave the prison.
He built himself he had a shiv that he carved a masterpiece with. He had a secret lair. He could just leave on the weekends.
Yeah, and so, like, we get sort of a taste of Lex as... Like, the thing with Lex is that he doesn't have superpowers. But he is so brilliant that he will outthink people, and really his only flaw is that he underestimates people, right? Like, he's so much more brilliant than them that sometimes he underestimates what they're capable of. But mostly he just outmaneuvers them, which he does very brilliantly. We have this great flashback episode where it basically goes back over the entire last couple of years and talks about how he's been planning this from the moment that he was captured. Yeah, we learned the two other big things in the House of L that we learned. We've been, since the end of the last season, we've had this other version of Supergirl, which is a black kryptonite thing. Harunel. Whatever. Harunel splits kryptonites in half. It's called MacGuffinite. Yeah. It doesn't matter. But there's a part of Supergirl has split off, and she crashed in Casnia, and they have been raising her as Red Daughter. But of course we find out that Lex is the one who's actually doing the work here to train her. The other thing we learn in House of L is that Eve is in fact the famous Lex Luthor sidekick, Tessmacher. And she was in and on it the whole time. They never really stood a chance. Good times. Oh, and this Lex is wonderful. Don't you agree? Mm-hmm. Who knew of the 2.5 men that one would be Lex Luthor? Who knew that Ducky would be Lex Luthor?
Well, whoever directed, I think, Superman 4, who cast him as Lenny Luthor.
Well.
Would we say that he is the second best Lex? Like, is he better than Jesse Eisenberg?
Yes.
Oh, God, yes.
So
is he better than Kevin Spacey?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all so right. Second, right? Second to Gene Hackman.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think he's better than Gene Hackman. I really think that this is the best Lex Luthor.
Those are like fighting words.
That's like saying that Tyler Hoechlin's better than Christopher Reeve. Like, I don't know. What are you saying right now?
Well, to be fair, I'm not a big... Like, I get why the Superman film was important, but to me, when I watched it, it was kind of a snooze fest.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, to be fair, the Nicolas Cage Superman movie probably would have been more iconic, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to talk about this season because there's just so much that happens, and it all feels very urgent. Like, it's all very, like, it's very much a commentary on our current political climate. It has those iconic Superman, Supergirl villains with Lex and with Tessmacher. And so it's just... And Red Daughter. Mm-hmm. It's a really good season. Like, I mean, I can't think of a single thing that I would just be like, this didn't need to be in there. No. But at the end of the day, though, order is restored for the...
Because Lex underestimates everyone.
Yes.
Well,
again.
But Lex also does reveal to Lena that Kara is Supergirl.
Yeah, he does get the last laugh.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most annoying part of this season, is the number of times that Tessa screamed at the TV, just tell her.
Yeah, okay, so We're going to talk about Supergirl this season and how this news affects Lena Luthor, so I won't get too far into it, but Kara really should have told Lena a long time ago. Like, there's not a reason why she didn't tell Lena, besides the fact that Lena is a Luthor, which I thought we got over a long time ago, but apparently we didn't. And so there is a lot about Lena and Lex, I think, together this season play off each other really well. Especially because Lena is doing this really interesting thing this season where she's kind of showing how you can be a good person operating in a gray area. And it really bothers me that all it took for her to start going down a villainous path was learning that her best friend had lied to her. Like, and I we can talk about why that is next podcast episode. But that is what Lex does, right? Lex knows how to manipulate Lena. It proves that no one can hurt you the same way family can. And so Lena kills Lex, by the way. We haven't even really talked about that. Because he's defeated by Supergirl, but he manages to portal away, just like Lex, knows how to do. He manages to portal away, but Lena knows where his hideouts are, and she shoots him and kills him. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great scene. Then Ben Lockwood, who, much like Ultron, is angry that there were puppets or there were strings on him. Kind of goes out and tries, and ultimately ends up redeeming himself, which I think
really redeem himself.
Right, but
he becomes angry and starts taking a super serum in order to make himself powerful. I mean, I guess he kills Otis Graves. That was good. But then he ends up getting in a fight with Alex and James, who also has superpowers. There's a really good storyline with James, too, with PTSD this season, which we don't really need to get into. But I do like the idea that, like, he's been kidnapped 17 times. Isn't that what he says? By Lex? Or, like, Lex is trying to kill him 17 times?
It's so good. Everything about this season, though, I think is good. I feel like, ultimately, the writers do lean a little too centrist for my tastes, but... Mm-hmm.
That's also the show, though.
Yeah.
It's a pretty centrist show.
But they do a lot of good things.
Yeah. So two little details that we need to mention before we wrap everything up. You can mention whatever you guys want, but
you're gonna say the two things I'm gonna say.
So Kelly Olsen is introduced. Well, it's very important to me because Alex's well-being is very important to me. But Kelly Olsen, James's sister, is introduced. She's a new character this season, and she is pretty early on introduced as an Alex love interest, right? Like, I mean, she's introduced because James is shot by Lex, by Eve. Halfway through the season, but she becomes a love interest for Alex. I like her a lot. I don't like her as much as I like Maggie.
Well, that's because Maggie was wonderful.
Maggie was wonderful. But I like her for Alex. She seems like she's also a soldier. She's a psychiatrist. And so she's able to talk about some of these things pretty well, I think, and be integrated into the main story. The other thing I wanted to mention is so I am very interested in androids and robots and cyborgs and all of the above, and I have been waiting for there to be a more brainy-centric storyline, and what's interesting is I think it's in the very last episode. Oh, no, it's in the second to last episode that this happens. He's reset really briefly and becomes an evil version of himself. That's more reliant on his ancestors' memories, and we all know that that's a reference to Brainiac. Is he a Superman villain originally?
Yes, and he might be coming in this season of Supergirl. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. I mean, I think the only other villain that I would be really as excited about as Lex would be Brainiac, and especially because I'm really interested to see sort of the relationship Brainy has with Brainiac, and with sort of this sort of the AI, artificial intelligence, emotions versus, logic and that kind of thing. I'm a sucker for it. I'm ready for it. We'll see what happens. It's a really interesting storyline choice.
So my two last things were, because this is the road to crisis. The Monitor shows up, drops off John's brother. John has a brother.
Yeah, John
and
has a
then
brother.
Takes Lex's corpse away. So this isn't over.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, so those are sort of the setup of Crisis. John has a brother. Lex is maybe alive, maybe not. We don't know.
I can really see John Cryer coming back to play Lex, especially since Lex, in multiple times will side with the heroes to help out.
Well, we see him in flashbacks on this current... We've seen him in at least one flashback currently on this season of Supergirl. So he is still in the employ of Berlanti and friends. So
yeah,
I would certainly expect to see him.
All right. Legends of Tomorrow, Season 4.
Yay!
This was fun.
Such a good season. Oh my god. It's so good. It made me really excited for next season, too. I really hope that next season's good. Because it'd be really hard to top this one.
Well, we should probably just go ahead and start with the new main cast member.
Constantine. So Constantine, as we mentioned last time, was introduced in season 3. I think he in 2 episodes in season 3.
I think he was like in 3 or 4, actually.
Yeah, he had like a shorter story arc, but his story arc was supposed to set up this idea that comes into fruition for season 4. So he shows up at the end of season 3 with like a dragon's head while the legends are on the beach at Aruba, and basically says like, you let some other stuff out when you let Malice or whatever out. And so that sets up the real conceit of this season, which is so last season it was time aberrations that they had to go and fix. This season it's capturing magical creatures that have escaped from this prison that they opened and have scattered across time and are wreaking havoc. So Constantine after being very resistant at first, joins the gang to help track down these magical creatures.
Magical creatures like unicorns, who are not fun, gentle beings. They're evil, and they will rip your nipple off. Fairy godmothers, swamp things, minotaurs, shapeshifters, love genies.
Well, no, he's
whatever.
he's a Hindu god.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dragons.
Yeah. So we get these like really fun like fairy tale fantasy mythological creatures that are scattered throughout time. And again, like this provides us with this really unique feel of the show where things are just fun because like crazy stuff is happening. Like the first episode is the unicorn at Woodstock, right? Because of course there was a unicorn at Woodstock. And so it's a fun show, and they do fun things with magical creatures this time. Although Constantine is kind of a downer, because Constantine is always a downer.
Constantine, this season, there are really 2 main tracks that this season operates on. There's Constantine's drama,
which is great.
And there's Nate's much more interesting to me drama about his dad, who is Biff from Back to the Future and is now in charge of the Time Bureau and a secret shadowy project named Project.
It's so perfect. Yeah, let's talk about Constantine's story arc because it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the Constantine story arc. So, I mean, the main villain of this season is Neron, who is a demon. And we kind of get a little, because Constantine is not the most forthcoming person about information of his backstory, we sort of get this in chunks throughout the beginning of the season. So Constantine is getting these like pretty dire, creepy warnings from a force that says like that he's coming after him and, all of this stuff. And we eventually find out that Constantine went up against a demon called Neron, because this is Constantine's job from the comics, is he sends demons back to hell, amongst other things. And so he goes up against this pretty powerful demon, and he manages to send the demon back to hell, but not before Neron inhabits the body of Constantine's love interest, whose name is escaping me currently. But it's really interesting on a variety. Desmond is his name. And so it's really interesting on a variety of levels because I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the rule of Constantine comics is that Constantine cannot be happy. So anytime that he becomes happy, whatever's making him happy either dies or gets taken away from him. And so he is in love with Desmond. We get these really, really great meet cute scenes of how he met Desmond, because Desmond was a bartender and all of these things. And he's happy and he's in love with Desmond. But then, of course, Neron has to inhabit Desmond, and Constantine, in the process of sending Neron to hell, has to also send his love to hell as well. And so we get this sort of revenge storyline where Neron is trying to break out of hell and ruin Constantine's life, but also Desmond is the body of Neron. So I thought that was very dramatic and very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this is fascinating. Their eventual journey to hell is great.
Yes. Constantine was always going to go to hell this season. Yeah, it's really good.
And the reveal of Azrid as probably the next season's big bad is really fun.
Can we talk about Vandal Savage since we're in hell now?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about Vandal Savage and.
So Ray gets, as part of the machinations with Constantine, including the part where he breaks time, which we haven't gotten into yet, which is probably the single best gag of this season. But to fix everything, Ray ends up spending some time in hell. And while he's in hell, he actually befriends Vandal Savage, who's also in hell. And they have a great time together. And to me, this was a great part of the season. The only thing that could have possibly topped it is if it had, instead of Vandal Savage, it had been Damien Dark. And I really like the idea of Damien Dark and Ray bonding over their love for Nora, but they chose to go in the Vandal Savage direction, which was way funnier. But we do also find out, by way of a line, that Damien Dark is not handling hell very well. So...
No, but I think, considering what we've said on this show about the first season and how terrible of a villain Vandal Savage is, it did make it better to see it played for laughs here. This idea that we get him back for a scene, and in hell, of course, he seems almost like a cheery guy. He's like, "Hey guys," and he's playing board games with Ray, because that's how you would torture each other, right? Is that you would make Ray play board games with Vandal Savage.
Well, Vandal Savage is some kind of torturer in this.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So it to me, it more seems like Ray's charm finally got into Vandal Savage.
Yeah.
Ray can charm almost anybody.
Yeah.
I think that's also the takeaway from this.
Right. But speaking of season 1 of Legends of Tomorrow, one of my favorite gags is in the episode Wet Hot American Bummer, when Sarah Lance and Ava sit down to watch a movie called Swamp Thing with 4 A's. Ava pulls up her phone and says, "Okay, Swamp Thing, apparently there are 4 A's in the name because it's the 4th film in the franchise." The AV Club gave it a D+, saying the production design is as lazy as the action staging, which is an actual AV Club review of season 1 of Legends of Tomorrow.
I like it.
I loved it so much. That was just a great little gag. There's so many really, really fun gags here. The episode Tagumo Attacks, which is, first of all, has it has a kaiju in it. That's great. But it also has Mick saving the day by being a literary reference.
Yes.
Or using his literature of making his warrior female come to life that he has written love stories about.
the main character of his romance novels is a 3-breasted warrior woman. And because this writer literally wrote a kaiju into existence using a magical artifact, he gets to write this character into existence. And then I think they like have sex, right? Like very loudly. And so like it's a really cool, there's a lot with Nick this season being a writer. Which I just think this is a great direction for his character to go, because he's still the same gruff, in a moral gray area Nick, but we get to see this growth, right? Like he's a good guy now, and he's embracing these parts of his character that he's sublimated under all this toxic masculinity. So he's doing things like he's writing romance novels, and he at one point is dragged to a convention, which was great. It's a really, really interesting development for him. And it also gives us a lot of laughs.
So a lot of bizarre stuff happens this season, but none more bizarre than as the result of Constantine going and changing the past and completely breaking everything. Because you get one.
You always get one in Legends.
This is Constantine's one.
Zari has done it.
Legends of Meow Meow.
Legends of well, but that's
which gives us the Custodians of Chronology. The Sirens, the even better Sirens of Space-Time. That was good. And just to prove that they can top anything they do, we end up with Puppets of Tomorrow.
Puppets of Tomorrow. Oh.
Okay, you guys please explain this, because out of context, that is... It is not nearly as funny as it is actually watching it.
Oh my god, so... Okay, so as you said, each legend I think gets one freebie. You get to break time once, and then when we fix it, you now know not to ever do that again. It's happened a couple of times on this show. But of course, because it's Constantine and he can't do anything small, he becomes convinced that if he just goes back in time, if he uses the Wave Rider to go back in time and prevent Desmond, like break up with Desmond, like prevent them from ever falling in love, that Desmond will live, everybody will be fine, etc., etc., etc. But of course, because he does this, he breaks time. So immediately, Charlie, who's a new character we haven't talked about yet, she's affected by this, but Zari turns into a cat, which is also my favorite gag of the episode, is that Constantine and Charlie carrying around Zari as a cat in a little cat backpack. But this leads us up to the episode Legends of Meow Meow, where Constantine never joined the Legends. In the first timeline, Sarah is killed by the unicorn at Woodstock, which leads the male members of the team, Nick, Nate, and Ray, to have a very violent version of the Legends called the Custodians of Chronology. Like, they're just shooting first, asking questions later. Nobody is spared, basically. There's no room for nuance with this team. They're killing anybody who seems like they're going to break time.
And so once Constantine realizes the results of his actions, instead of doing the responsible thing, which is going back and fixing the timeline to the best of his ability, because nobody's introduced him to Barry Allen yet, he decides, well, if we just take care of the unicorn thing, then everything will be fine, which isn't what happens. And instead, we have future number 2, which is the Sirens of Space-Time,
which
with
is very
Sarah,
Charlie's
Ava,
Angels.
and Gideon.
Yeah, it's very Charlie's Angels. It's all female.
Which is a show
we
would all watch.
No, I would watch the Sirens of Space-Time.
I need to stress here that you get the openings for all of these shows, too.
Oh, yeah. It's like it's very meta. Like, every time they're introduced to a new future, it's like watching the opening credits of a show.
Right. And the Puppets of Tomorrow is...
Yeah.
by far the apex of that gag. And then after that, we kind of cycle through. We do the thing where we cycle through more possibilities, but eventually Constantine realizes the only way to fix things is to go back and do the thing he didn't want to do.
Right. So, like, part of this is, of course, I mean, it goes back to Flashpoint, right? Like, Barry has to let his mother die in order for time to be the way that it is.
Yes.
Constantine has to banish a demon wearing the body of his boyfriend to hell in order for time to work.
Yeah, we really get in this season, we get the lesson, and I love that the lesson is delivered in part by Back to the Future alum. His name, I always forget his name, Thomas F. Wilson. But we get the lesson that you can't change the past. The only thing that you can change is the future, which is where we end up on this season.
Yeah, so the other through line this season is Nate works through his issues with his father, again, played by Biff.
Biff, Griff, Mad Dog Tannen.
Whatever. And so they work through their issues, and there's a very, Sam mentioned this while we were watching it, there was a very X-Files-like situation going on at the Time Bureau where there was like this super secret project that the Legends were not privy to, and they were taking magical animals away, or creatures away, so we think they're being tortured, and like,
But
all
they're
this
not
stuff.
being tortured at all.
Yeah, so Hayward, Nate's father, based on a young Nate's childhood crayon drawings, decides to make a theme park for these magical creatures in order to help build tolerance of them.
Called Hayworld.
Yeah, he wants to call it Hayworld. And so there's this idea that, like, which again, like, sure, okay. Like, I find it a little problematic that your path to tolerance involved a theme park. Like, is this Westworld? Like,
It's
I'm
like
not...
it's like SeaWorld teaching us about marine conservation.
Yeah, I'm
So-
a little confused about the jump from I want to.
Do you remember
tolerance.
why he calls it Hayworld, right? That it's based on a drawing that Nate made when he was a
Yes.
child.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's why I thought was a little bit problematic. Like, yeah, let's exploit these creatures, and that will teach people how to tolerate them. Anyway, in the logic of the show, it works.
Right. And in the logic of a show, it's a surprisingly sweet, touching gesture that is very problematic, but it's also, it informs so much of Hank Haywood's actions.
Mm-hmm.
And when we really find out about it, Hank Haywood is, of course, dead.
Yeah, he's
Right.
killed by Neron, who wants to use the magical creatures to open up a portal to hell, to rescue his girlfriend. Which, by the way, also hilarious storyline this season is that Neron. So we're introduced to a fairy godmother near the beginning, and we think she's just another magical creature, and she's banished to hell by Constantine. But then, and Neron keeps talking about how he wants to free his beloved Tabitha.
Right.
From hell.
Which, by the way, an old lady who could have played the fairy godmother from Cinderella in the live-action movie.
Oh yeah, no, she looks like the Cinderella godmother. Like she's
Breaks
yes.
into song at one point.
Breaks into song wearing the poofy blue dress. But yeah, so Neron frees Tabitha from hell, and it turns out to be this fairy godmother. And so like there's a lot of like really great sort of in-jokes there. The fairy godmother tricks Nora, who becomes like Nora Dark becomes a big character this season. She tricks her into taking on the fairy godmother role, so we get to see Nora in the poofy dress. It's really kind of great.
The other character.
Gary's best friend, yes.
The other big character gag that we get in episode 3 is that episode 3 is the Dancing Queen episode, where once again there is reference made to the disco mission from the last season, which is where I said at this point, we need to see this mission at some point, and it ought to be the series finale. But episode 3, Dancing Queen, is they're going after what they believe is a leprechaun posing as a member of a British punk band, but it's actually a shapeshifter who just so happens to look exactly like somebody we're familiar with.
Well, she gets stuck in that.
Yes.
Yeah. So Amaya, I think we mentioned this in the last episode about Legends. Amaya leaves the Legends at the end of season 3. She goes back to Zambezi. She embraces her future, right? It's very sad. But they get to keep the actress here because when they find this shapeshifter, she is caught by them, and she's trying to convince them that she just doesn't want to go back to prison. Like, she's not evil. She's not killing anyone. She's just promoting the punk scene, I guess, in London. And so she's shifting between all of these different people, trying to like convince them to let her go. And she, of course, takes on the face of Amaya, and Constantine freezes her in that body for at least a few episodes until she gets it back. By then she's used to it, right? But yeah, so we get to keep the actress Maisie Richardson.
Maisie Richardson Sellers.
Maisie Richardson Sellers. I like this character. I like her as Charlie so much better than I liked her as Amaya. Mainly because Charlie, I think, fits the tone of the show better than Amaya does. She's got that punk rock sort of feel. She's a rebel, she gets along really well with Mick.
And Constantine.
In a lot of ways. And Constantine. Yeah, so I think, plus she provides nuance, right? It would have been very easy for this show to just say, magical creatures, evil, people, good. Just like the aliens versus humans thing in Supergirl. And so I think that she, and then the storyline with Mona, really provide a lot of nuance into like, okay, well, you can't just say that all of a species or all of a type of thing is evil.
Right. The other new legend we get is Mona, the fangirl of the Legends.
Love Mona. Mona's great.
Who eventually gets hired by the Time Bureau, ends up being bitten by one of the magical creatures, and becomes...
who she falls in love with.
She does fall in love with him. So, fangirl, legend, werewolf.
She's a big fangirl of Mick's books, which is great.
She didn't know it was Mick's books.
Yeah.
She
reads them to what's his face? Kanane.
Yeah, but she also tries to get Nora Dark to read them.
Yeah.
Yes. So we get a lot of transition with the Legends with these new characters, and we get a final transition when Hayworld is so successful that it erases the dystopian 2042 that Zari came from, which means, because this is how time travel works, Zari doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, so because what they do with Hayworld ends up creating this atmosphere of tolerance, which changes the fact that Argus apparently in the future declares military martial law. And so because Argus never does that, her brother Bayrod doesn't die. And so he actually is now in the Legends instead of Zari. That's like the last scene we see in this episode, or in the season, is that Zari is no longer on the team. We assume she's somewhere else, if she exists at all. But that Bayrod has been with them the whole time.
And Nate maybe knows that something's different, but this sets up a really interesting... They were really thoughtful, I think, in what was happening here. As the people who were left out of the crossover this year, they were really thoughtful about what happens here, because we do get, Andy, as you said, Astra perhaps being set up as the big bad, and we have these issues. We're going to have to figure out the whole Zari Bayrod situation, but if you look at how the first episode of Legends in January is billed, it's billed as a special episode because Legends always premieres mid-season. So they did a business of, in the Hayworld episode where chaos is happening in Hayworld, we see a brief scene of the Monitor. Basically, is he actually eating popcorn? He's eating
popcorn.
Well,
yeah.
Right. He's
well,
just
it's because they're putting on the show.
Yeah, he's like, I don't even know what to do with this. Like here I was in Elseworlds, like giving a book to a crazy eugenics dude to like set up chaos and see how they would deal with it. All I had to do was follow these idiots around and they would have done it for me. So that's the Monitor setup for Crisis, but they do a very good job of basically saying, here's what our next season's going to be. But we're not going to worry about that till after Crisis. Like we're going to be involved in Crisis, but none of this stuff matters till after Crisis. Don't worry about it.
Just cutting to the while they're putting on this weird Legends variety show, just cutting to the Monitor, and then the next time you see him, he's just munching on popcorn and enjoying himself.
And there's also a really funny joke. I think it's either in the last episode or the second last episode where they actually do try to call for help from the Flash and Arrow and like anybody else, but then they're all like, oh, we're too busy, we have our own shit going on, and then Sarah's like, should have done the crossover. Like, it's a very throwaway line where she's just like, we should have been part of the crossover, you guys, because no one wants to help us now. And so yeah,
They freaking have to pretend to be some of the characters from the other shows, and
Yeah, because nobody knows who they are.
right, and Mick is writing it as it's happening, and this season is my favorite season in all the Arrowverse.
It's so good. Like, it's so weird, but it's so much fun. It's like if somebody took a bunch of really great bits and just strung them together, and somehow they made narrative sense.
And this is something we talked about earlier off mic. You know, what is the Arrowverse going to be like after Crisis? Legends has a way forward after Crisis in a way that none of the other shows really do.
Well, and I think what makes Legends successful too is this model they have of mostly starting mid-season. They have much shorter seasons than the other shows. I think the longest season has 18 episodes. This season 4 only had 16. And so I think that the storytelling is very tight. There isn't a lot of filler like there can be in Flash and Arrow, especially. Like everything just seems to go forward in a way that feels very fresh and very new and very exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, just having 16 episodes is great. Having this sense of humor is fascinating. I'm looking at the titles of the next season's episodes because the first episode is going to be Crisis. And then the next episode, the first real episode of the season, is a mockumentary style episode called Meet the Legends. There's another episode called Mortal Kombat,
which Katie Lotz directed. Like,
yeah. There's just
a Katie Lotz directed episode.
Right. There's another one called Romeo v. Juliet: Dawn of Justness. Like, I'm always excited.
It's. I mean, that's the thing is that like with Flash and Arrow, sometimes the storylines can become very predictable. With this, it doesn't. Like, you really don't know what's going to happen, except for it's going to be weird. It's going to involve a lot of great characters that you really love and that you've grown to know very well. It's so good. And I would like to point out, since we've been talking about diversity today, this season featured on the same show 2 characters who were bisexual. Like, and so both Constantine and Sarah are bisexual characters, and I just think that that's great because usually when you have shows that are trying to be diverse like this, one is enough, right? We have one gay character. That's our stand-in for all gay characters, you know? And so it's really great to see that they're doubling down on this idea that no, like, you can be bisexual in different ways, you can be gay in different ways, you can be trans in different ways. Right. And so I think that works really well in these shows.
The episode with this weird space Akia dream. It's such a beautiful episode with Ava and Sarah talking about getting old together. There's so many just brilliant moments in this season as a whole, while still telling really emotionally effective stories, which is what we've come to expect from this. Paul Rubens voicing the murderer, the puppet.
Yeah, I forgot about that episode. Puppets creep me out.
I mean, I haven't seen a great puppet episode since Angel like that.
Oh my god, don't even bring that up. That episode gave me nightmares. Angel,
It just
so bad.
Spike walking in and Puppet Angel beating him up. Like, it's so great.
Oh god. Yeah, so there's also a puppet episode. So anyone who's scared of puppets, you might want to like hide under a blanket for that one or something.
Yeah. Anyway, I think this season is a must-watch season of television just in general. Like, I think everyone should like force their friends to watch it.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, I don't know if it's as effective if you haven't seen previous seasons of Legends. Again, you could probably skip season 1, but I think you do kind of need to see 2, 3, and 4 in order to get some of the payoff that we get here. But as a show, it gets better. Like, I think when we were talking about ranking them before we started doing this, it's definitely 4, 3, 2, 1. Like,
yeah, and this is also a season that got listed by actual television critics a few times as one of the best shows on television this year.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it. I was excited every single time there was a new episode out. Like, and that's very rare.
The Mexican lucha episode, the Jane Austen episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's quality. It's quality work.
Yeah, so I think that should be it. We went a little long, but both of these seasons are so worth talking about. Supergirl for actual more serious reasons, and Legends for just being the absolute best.
Watch them together, because I think that the Legends might balance out how depressed you are when you're watching Supergirl.
Yeah.
Did we have an order for Supergirl? Did we decide? This is the best season of Supergirl, right?
Yes.
Are we in agreement?
Yeah. For me, I think Supergirl is 4, 2, 3, 1.
Is that what? I think that's a pretty. I would say that. Yeah. 4, 2, 3, 1. Yeah.
But 2 and 3 are so close together. For 4 is far and above the best.
Oh yeah, I don't think that there's any doubt about that.
Yeah. So go ahead, guys. Plug your pluggables.
You can find me on Twitter at Suela Tessa. Suela spelled SWEHLA.
I'm on Twitter at Sam_Morris9.
Okay. And you can find me on Twitter at Hebrews Pale Ale. You can also find me on Letterboxd. I've started doing the Letterboxd thing, so check that out and check out my watch list. Make recommendations for me to what to watch next, and I'm going to try to write one full text review once a week. Other than that, you can find the podcast wherever you download podcasts. That's all we have for today. Class dismissed.